Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Good to have you all with us. The Jeffrey Epstein story goes to the heart of our society, a bad part of the heart of our society. It's the politics and the power that exists in this country. It's about the power of capital and the interplay of those powerful people. It appears to be about the protection of one of their own, involving Trump maybe, Clinton, Kevin Spacey, others, with the weight at this moment falling on Secretary of Labor Acosta, who was once prosecuting attorney who chose not to prosecute Epstein and to not protect the underage girls who were his victims. Surrounding it is the critically important story of the sexual exploitation of children, the power of patriarchy, and how twisted human sexuality can be. It's also about race and class in our criminal justice system, where if Epstein's name was Eric Garner, he would be behind bars for a long time already, if allowed to live at all. Our guest is David Rosen, who's a writer and business development consultant. For the last decade, he has written extensively about sex, politics, and American life. His most recent book is Sex, Sin, and Subversion, The Transformation of 1950s New York, Forbidden into America's New Normal. And he wrote The Epstein Affair, Take Two for Counterpunch, and joins us at this moment. And welcome. Good to have you with us here on The Real News.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
I almost don't know where to begin. There was a conversation I had just before we went on the air where someone asked about the prevalence of this kind of behavior. This is a larger part of the question that can come from either party, of people in power, period. And this, what Epstein is doing, I think, we're probably just seeing the tip of the iceberg with the Epstein case, but also it's emblematic of something much deeper and symptomatic of a much larger problem that we face with power, sex, and politics in our country.
We do, and it's the legacy of patriarchy and the abuse by which men could inflict themselves on women, and particularly young women. And that's the sad story that, you know, the Me Too movement has done a great deal to expose it. Many women, the count that I have, about 16 or 17 women have come out and accused Trump of sexual abuse.
Right.
There are any number of stories as to Clinton's sort of extramarital affairs. So this is about patriarchy and the power that money and wealth and social standing allows these men to essentially get away with what they want to. And you had mentioned part of what I think is the equation that's going on here. What's going to be very interesting as more and more information comes out, and assuming that the information comes out, which it hasn't to now. I mean, as I don't know, your viewers may be aware that Epstein was tried in 2008 and was given a very light slap on the wrist. And unfortunately, all the material in that case was suppressed so that neither the victims nor the public could get access to it. On July the 3rd of this year, it began to come out. It was at least a judge here in New York said it was no longer had to remain secret. So as that stuff starts to come out, we might learn a lot more about what he was doing with whom. I mean, that is, who participated in his sexual exploits as either friends or customers or whatever. But I was only wanted to get to the next piece, which is really the one that I think is the most critical at this moment, which is the role of not only who's now the current Secretary of Labor, Mr. Acosta.
Right, Alexander Acosta, yeah.
Right, but also the attorneys who defended him, that is Epstein, during his trial, who worked for Kirkland, and which was where the current Attorney General works, and who at that time, not him personally, but his firm represented Epstein. And also there's Attorney Dershowitz, who's been a strong supporter of Mr. Trump all the way along. So the plot thickens. The plot thickens, and Kenneth Starr. How could one forget Kenneth Starr in the midst of all this?
Right.
So there's a lot more to be uncovered in this expose, but it's really about the battle over patriarchy and the fact that, I mean, it's to me ironic. I live here in New York City, and today the mayor and the city celebrated the the women's soccer team, which won the world championship. So we're in a moment where this great celebration is going on, as well as these great revelations. Well, and it's the women who've been pushing this all the way along.
No, it's fine. I mean, we live in a world, as always, of massive contradictions, and I think that it's an interesting moment to juxtapose what we did a program on the women and what they did in the U.S. soccer team and the power that they have and what they stood for and what they're standing for, and then this story. I mean, let me go back a minute here. I mean, when the FBI prepared that 53-page sex crime indictment against Epstein back in 2007, he could have gone to prison for life. So, right? And instead of facing these charges of sex trafficking and everything else that happened to him, it was just 2 minor charges. I think, if I remember, prostitution or solicitation or prostitution and procurement of minors, and he was represented by the people you talked about, and Acosta was the prosecuting attorney.
Correct. And who also worked with that same law firm. You have to understand that Acosta had previously worked for that same law firm, and the guy, his name is, I believe, Lefkowitz, who was the principal attorney representing Epstein, was his friend, and they worked together at this law firm. And they cut a deal basically outside of conventional legal procedures, between a prosecutor and a representative of a defense witness, a defense suspect. They went to a motel, or a hotel rather, and they sat down and they cut a deal. So, unheard of.
Let me ask this question, what you just said. I mean, what do we know about that? I mean, how can you prove there was collusion between Acosta and these people to let
well, it's not necessarily. I mean, I'm not accusing them of any kind of collusion. I'm basically repeating information that the Miami Herald, and I recommend to anybody who is really interested in this story in terms of its origins and how it played out, read Julie Brown's pieces about in 2018. Her pieces that kick roll this whole story. There was an exceptional piece, and they won a Pulitzer for it because it revealed what was really going on in this trial and how it got completely manipulated. Now, I'm not saying there's collusion. I think that we need to go to a trial to determine.
Right.
But there's a lot of weird stuff that went on that's not acceptable legal practice.
No. And in all of this, one of the things that never seems to come out in all of this, it clearly was swept under the rug in this case that involved Acosta when he was prosecuting it, and it continues to happen to people, is that the children who were the victims of the sex trafficking world, mostly young girls who were many young women of color, young working class kids, some of them not even knowing what they were getting into.
Right.
What about them? I mean, they're the ones that get swept to the side here.
Absolutely. Right? No, I agree with you 100%. I mean, the sad part of this story in terms of and again, I refer you back to the Miami Herald that did some great work on this, and they have a really interesting set of videos with interviews with some of the girls who've now grown up. And what you get is a feeling, I kept getting, I can't imagine this happening to them. I think they were seduced into it by money, by having fun, and then drugs and a good time. And when you're 14, 15, 16, you don't see the consequences, and you don't fully appreciate or understand what you're getting yourself into. As I mentioned earlier, I have 2 daughters, and I can picture them having, I can't picture them, but I can imagine the kids of their age when they were that age being seduced by this. It's very exciting.
Well, I mean, there was came out just for...
Let me just add one more piece, because I think these were poor and working class girls who essentially, I keep thinking of their parents, I would wonder if they supported Trump, because they come out of the same demographics that would support him, assuming I understand the demographics and all that. It's scary. I mean, it's the weird contradictions of this whole thing. Anyway.
But the kind of sense of power that some men have, their sense of having a right to young girls if they want young girls, and crosses political lines. This is, totally. I mean, it goes from right to left and everything in between. I mean, and that's something that we seem to be loath to kind of address, is what has happened to our society when this patriarchal insanity has taken over our behavior and what we think is appropriate. I mean, not that people think it's appropriate, but it's allowed to go on. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think that there's a whole another world that this is only tangentially related to because it's a little more sophisticated and upmarket. But, there's a vast worldwide sex rings of pedophiles. And they're a scary group. I mean, this networks, and they're also, there are networks in the formal sense that they actually have websites and secret, Facebook or other that haven't been discovered. And some get outed and some get arrested. But there's even tours that I've written about that. Men go off to these tours to either Mexico or
Thailand.
Thailand. It's a pathology, it's a sexual pathology of really power. And it's the execution of power by people who have it against people who don't. And with a sexual dimension to it. I mean, power is played out in many different ways. This is one of them, and this is probably the most barbaric and has been persisting forever.
So a couple things before we run out of time. Before we went on the air, there was a story that came out, and there's maybe many of stories coming out in the coming days and weeks. A woman whose name is Jennifer Rose told the story when she was 15 years old. A woman came to her and talked to her and brought her over to Epstein's house and showed her around. The next thing she knew, when she came over by herself, Epstein showed her the bedroom and a place where there was a massage table where he had her stripped down to her panties and massage him. And then after a few visits, she was raped, and he paid her $300 per visit. And she didn't think of it at first until she was raped. And then she never went back. But I mean, so here's another story that came out just today, just before our conversation began. So as this unfolds, I'm curious if this might be the case that opens up the chance to really prosecute and go after men in power who have done these things in a broader scale in terms of his connections, and B, kind of helps the country really understand the depth of this issue.
Well, I hope so. I mean, the case that started the New York inquiry, and I apologize, I can't remember the woman's name. I think it's Greel. I don't remember her name. I apologize. She has been pursuing a case against a woman named Maxwell, who is Epstein's sort of pimp, if you will, who solicited many of these girls and used her own sort of, she's apparently comes from being a very upper class English background, used her sort of British airs to essentially assuage the fears and concerns of the parents of some of these young girls. What happened is this young woman who's now, I don't know, she's like in her 30s, I think. Mm-hmm. She brought the suit that the New York judge overturned on July 3rd, which permits the opening up of all the records that have been suppressed by Mr. Acosta. Remember, that was one of his actions. He suppressed all the information. Now, I don't know if the woman you're mentioning, the young girl you're mentioning, if she's part of that suit, or if she's even identified in the material. I haven't had the opportunity to read the material. But I think there's going to be a lot of these cases. And again, I don't know if she's part of Florida, because the Florida case may have been already closed and they won't be able to go back and reopen it. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't do that.
I think someone was in New York, but yeah.
Oh, in New York. So there you go. I mean, then she may well join the suit, or with other New York women who will join the suit. Anyway, I mean,
so that's fine. Before we close, I mean, is the question of political power and what could be opened up here and what all this means and how the connections are made. And I just, for our listeners who will be up on the screen, want to read this quote that came from New York Magazine several years back from Trump, and I think it's really enlightening. The entire quote's enlightening. So let me let you look at it, and I'll read it to you.
I know the Trump.
It said, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy." Trump booms from a speakerphone.
Right.
"He's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it. Jeffrey enjoys his social life."
Right.
So once again, we're seeing this horrendous misogynistic behavior from Trump. But that, we can comment on that for just briefly. But I'm curious just about the unfolding story of men in power and this, and covering up for one another, which is what this is all about.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, the Trump quote seems totally Trump. I mean, in a sense,
Yes.
He says the obvious, and with a wink and a nod, so everybody knows what the real story is, but he won't say it. There's, as I may have mentioned, I encourage your viewers to check it out. There's been a series in 2016 in this magazine called Jezebel about the relationships between Trump and Epstein in terms of their sort of buddy tag team sex scenes at both of their houses or estates, whatever you want to call them, in New York City, that they dated a series of women, and one woman has raised this question legally as to being raped. She was 13 at the time. Mm-hmm. So now, getting to your deeper question, again, this is, I apologize if I sound simplistic. This is patriarchy and power playing itself out in a sexual dimension. What's stunning to me is that everyone is, we all know this. I mean, there's a way in which, I shouldn't say we all, I mean, anyone who has a critical perspective about how the capitalist system works and what wealth does this only confirms our worst sense of how the system works. Because when there's no social safeguards and these guys can act out their power in any way they want, they do it many different ways. I mean, who knows what the other ways they do it. But the sexual one, especially with young and more, I would call them innocent because they're only 13, 14 years old. There's something pathological. It's scary. It's sick. There's a social sickness that's very deep that these people share. I personally can't imagine doing this. Having raised two daughters, I can't imagine this.
It's really, I just hope that politically we really wrestle with this in an honest way and something comes out of this beyond just another story that we talk about in the media. And David Rosen, I'm sorry, I deeply appreciate you taking the time. It's been a great conversation. As we do more of this, I look forward to really talking to you a great deal more. And encourage people to read your work. I think that your book, Sex, Sin, and Subversion, is an amazing book, and people should check that out. They want kind of get the depth and background of what this can mean.
Well, I have a website. They can go to David Rosen Writes. Just simple that. I write a lot. We will
link to that. And
cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
It's a great pleasure. Have fun. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye now.
And I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. We deeply appreciate you watching. We'll be covering this with some depth. Take care.